Chapter 96. DALY'S Guess. By the afternoon of the next day, Klein had fully recovered from any signs of exhaustion. He walked into the Blackthorn Security Company with steady footsteps.
Good morning, Klein. The weather is so cool and beautiful today. I'm looking forward to tonight's feast.
Roseanne, who was wearing a light green dress, greeted him with a smile from behind the reception desk. Klein deliberately touched his stomach and said,
Miss Roseanne, you shouldn't be talking about that so early in the morning. I'm already sick of today's mission that has yet to arrive. I only hope for the evening to arrive sooner.
Me too.
Roseanne chuckled. She looked to the left and right, then she beckoned for Klein to come closer. She lowered her voice and said,
I met Madame Daly earlier.
Klein asked in surprise,
Spirit medium Madame Daly?
The most famous spirit medium from Owa County had been living at Enmat Harbor all this time, and it wasn't a short distance from Tingen. Roseanne gave a firm nod and said,
Yes, but she has already left. She was my ideal beyonder. If I were to become a spirit medium, I would leave Tingen and travel all around the world by myself, to Intis, to Fasak, to Fainapotter, to the southern continent, to the vast prairies, primitive forests, and snow-covered plains.
Lady, be aware of the Nighthawks. Rules.
Klein shook his head in amusement.
Even Madame Daly has to apply and obtain permission to leave Enmat Harbor.
Roseanne said, peeved.
I know that, but you can't just remind me about it now and shatter my dreams. The truth is, I would never become a beyonder. It's too dangerous. I don't know when I'll die from sudden gunfire. From what I've seen, beyonders are basically people who turn themselves into monsters to fight against monsters.
Klein replied, sighing.
Archbishop Chainzi said that we are guardians, but also a bunch of miserable wretches that are constantly fighting against threats and madness.
The quote had left a deep impression on him.
To fight against the abyss, we have to endure the corruption of the abyss.
The two of them fell silent in unison. Roseanne was the first to break the silence as she pursed her lips towards the partition and said,
Captain wanted you to meet him when you arrived?
Klein, all right. With his hat and cane in hand, Klein passed through the partition and entered Dunn's office after knocking on the door. A middle-aged gentleman with deep and serene gray eyes and a high hairline put down his coffee cup and said with a smile,
Daly was here.
Klein replied with a smile.
Can't say that I'm surprised. Roseanne had just informed me.
Dunn didn't mind his humor, but sighed.
Daly was just transferred to the Backland Diocese, which is the world's busiest and most crowded city. They have the highest population of beyonders and the most opportunities. She has a higher chance of becoming an archbishop or a senior deacon than me.
Klein asked curiously as he took a seat.
Why?
Dunn thought for nearly 20 seconds before answering,
She has a unique talent in mastering and exploiting sequence potions. I've mentioned the internal rule of the Nighthawks before. If you want to consume the next potion in the sequence, you'll have to wait 3 years and go through a strict examination to prevent any loss of control. But typically, 3 years is far from sufficient. I spent 3 years going from a sleepless to a midnight poet. It took me 9 years to go from a midnight poet to nightmare, a full 9 years. And to go from nightmare to sequence 6, I've already spent 3 years. I have no idea how many more years I need. When our bodies age and our energy starts to decline, even if we overcome the latent dangers, we shouldn't attempt advancing anymore. This is because the risk of losing control at that point is so high that no one is willing to risk it. As for Daly, she is different from me and most beyonders. After she became a corpse collector, she handed in a special application after only a year. She hoped to consume the follow-up potion immediately. What surprised everyone was that she actually passed through the stricter examination and obtained the Gravedigger potion. It only took her 1 more year to go from Gravedigger to Spirit Medium. This year will be her 5th year as a Beyonder. She is only 24 this year, young enough to have many opportunities ahead of her.
On the surface, she's the most famous spirit medium in Alwood County, but she truly is an actual spirit medium. Isn't that acting? Old Neil had apparently mentioned that Madame Daly had similar tendencies.
Klein felt that he had grasped the key reason for Madame Daly's quick ascension through the ranks. Klein comforted Dunn, but added in his heart,
Captain, you're young enough as well. You're only in your 30s. Vicky, it's just that your memory isn't that great.
Dunn drank a sip of his coffee. He shook his head and smiled bitterly. List, Klein purposely asked,
Why didn't you ask Madame Daly about her method of mastering and exploiting sequence potions?
Dunn put down his coffee cup and massaged his temples as he spoke.
She told me to become a true nightmare. I don't know what that means.
Play the role of a nightmare. Man, a nightmare sounds sinister.
Klein creased his eyebrows and temporarily fell silent. Then Dunn took out his smoking pipe and sniffed at it.
Daly and I discussed the possibility of Seer's follow-up potion being clown. Assuming that the member of the Seers didn't lie to you, she brought up an interesting hypothesis.
Klein asked hurriedly, his eyes turning bright.
What hypothesis?
He had once used a divination method to determine if clown was the follow-up potion of Seer. The answer he received had been vague, but it seemed close to being a confirmation. Dunn's deep and serene gray eyes swept his gaze at him while he said in thought,
A normal sequence pathway proceeds in a stepped manner. They advance according to a particular similarity. For instance, Sleepless, Midnight Poet, and Nightmare are all obviously related to the darkness of the night, as well as the peaceful sleep and tranquility that is generated from sleep. It can be imagined that every subsequent sequence would have identical traits, only with more power and a wider scope. They might be linked to secrets, disaster, horror, the crimson moon, etc. Certain sequence pathways appear unrelated, but when we analyze them in detail, we can still find similarities, such as assassin and instigator. Their implied similarity is to bring people calamities, pain, sorrow, and despair. Hence, the follow-up sequences should abide by this pattern.
Klein paid close attention and asked proactively,
But Seer and Clown doesn't have such a connection?
Dunn nodded and said,
Yeah, Daly believes that there might be sequence pathways that share another kind of relationship. After all, there's a lot we do not know.
He paused for a moment before saying,
Daly said that, in this sort of pathway, the low to mid-sequence potions would respectively provide the Beyonder an ability that seems brand new and unrelated to the others. When the Beyonder reaches a point of qualitative change, these abilities will mix into an abnormally powerful job that includes them all. In other words, the pathway doesn't advance step by step, but instead it's a relationship of dissection and combination.
Klein listened intently, but he felt lost. Dunn lifted his right hand and said,
A normal sequence pathway advances a bit at a time, just like a child growing up. A growing child becomes taller, stronger, heavier, and more mature from a young age, while special sequence pathways are more like.
Having said this, Dunn lifted up his thumb.
This is sequence 9.
Then he lifted up his index finger.
This is sequence 8.
Then he gradually lifted up the rest of his fingers.
Each and every finger is independent and doesn't seem to be related to the others. But in the end.
When he said the word end, Dunn clenched his fingers into a tight fist. Klein was suddenly enlightened. He agreed with Lady Daly's guess and the captain's metaphor.
I understand now. Maybe that's how it is?
He nodded in deep thought.
Sequence 8 Clown and Sequence 9 Seer are completely different and have brand new abilities. And, according to the description from the Nighthawks, intelligence, the corresponding Sequence 7 and Sequence 8 Clown don't share any similarities either.
Klein fell silent for a while before curiously pressing on.
At which stage would the different abilities combine to form a qualitative change?
Dunn took another sip of coffee and chuckled.
Daly and I guessed sequence 4.
Klein blurted out.
Why?
Dunn said wistfully,
Because according to the way the churches categorize sequences, sequence 4 is the beginning point of the higher sequences. It is said that merely achieving such a level brings about qualitative changes in vitality and energy. In ancient times, sequence 4 beyonders were qualified to be called demigods in the fourth epoch. It's a pity that such beyonders are very rare in this era.
Klein asked with interest,
If sequence 4 to sequence 1 are high sequence beyonders, then who are the low sequence beyonders?
Dunn laughed in a self-deprecating manner.
Sequences 9 through 7 were considered as low sequences 1,000 years ago, but in recent centuries, beyonders are few in number and each church has listed sequence 7 as a mid-sequence.
Sequence 9 and sequence 8 are low sequences. Then, sequences 7 through 5 are mid-sequences. Finally, those sequence 4 and above are high sequences.
Klein repeated in his head and inevitably felt a yearning for that.
Emperor Roselle was a high sequence beyonder. However, the higher the sequence, the greater the risk of losing control.
Klein thought to himself in fear. He asked, as though in a seemingly casual manner,
What is the sequence 4 potion for the Church of the Goddess called?
Dunn shook his head and smiled.
In actual fact, I'm not sure. My security clearance isn't high enough for me to be privy to that information. I'll be able to read them when I become a diocese bishop, or Nighthawk's deacon. In fact, at least half of the church's 13 archbishops and 9 senior deacons at the top of the church's hierarchy are below sequence 4. That's just me being optimistic. The Archbishop Ince Zangwill, who became wanted, lost control when he tried to advance to sequence 4.
The one who stole sealed artifact 008? His potion was apparently called Gatekeeper.
Klein thought and probed.
Is Sleepless Sequence 5 Gatekeeper?
Dunn. Male. No, that's in Spirit Medium's pathway. You'll be allowed to access that information when you reach sequence 7 and become a bishop or a captain of a Nighthawks team.
Gatekeeper is sequence 5 of the Spirit Medium pathway? Does it mean that it's keeping watch over the gates to hell? Or keeping watch over the gates to the spirit world?
Klein guessed. Dunn smiled and said,
All right, go to Old Neil and continue with your studies. Don't forget about dinner tonight at Old Will's restaurant. Reservations have been made. I'll introduce you to the rest of the Nighthawks officially.
Klein forced a smile.
All right, I've already prepared the money.
Dunn waved.
No, there's no need. Have you forgotten that we have additional bonuses? The part about you completing an assigned mission.
Klein was momentarily taken aback before replying with a beaming smile.
All right, Captain.
He turned around and walked towards the door while counting inwardly.
3, 2, 1. Why didn't Captain call me back?
Klein dragged out 1 for a very long time, only to be surprised that Captain Dunn Smith hadn't forgotten to add anything.
A miracle.
In the armory, Old Neil stole a glance at Klein, who was in a good mood. Old Neil, male, don't be obsessed with tonight's dinner. You still have a lot of things to learn, such as more ritualistic magic, ancient Hermes, Dragonese, Elvish, and many more.
Yeah, every afternoon besides your day off, you have to have at least 2 hours of combat training with an instructor.
Klein was shocked.
Combat training? Captain didn't mention it.
Old Neil nodded and didn't hesitate to answer.
He forgot.
Chapter 97, Combat Teacher. At 2 in the afternoon, outside of a simple 2-storied building that was in disrepair at the outskirts of the North Borough, Klein, who was in his probationary inspector uniform, looked at the weed-filled garden and the vines that had crept up the walls. He turned his head in surprise.
My combat instructor lives here? Shouldn't a combat artist who was selected by the Nighthawks be exceptional?
Leonard Mitchell, who had guided Klein there, snickered and said,
Don't underestimate Mr. Gawain because of his residence's surroundings. Although he was never conferred an aristocratic title, he was a true knight back in the day.
Having said that, The poetic nighthawk, who was dressed in a white shirt, black trousers, and buttonless leather boots, suddenly felt melancholic.
He was active during the waning era of the knights. The warriors donning their armors would storm through enemy ranks despite the gunfire and cannon fire, destroying their enemies and redefining the battle lines. But alas, they were quickly met with the invention of the high-pressure steam guns and six-barrel machine guns. From then on, the knights had to gradually step down. Mr. Gawain met the same fate. More than 20 years ago, the Awa Knights, Order of Chivalry, faced the most advanced weaponry of the Antitis Republic Army. Sigh. Every time I recall this, it seems like I'm touching the dust heaps of history. The poet in me stirs when thinking of this irreversible and fated destiny. But alas, I do not know how to compose the poem.
Then what's the point in saying so much?
Klein acted oblivious to Leonard's self-deprecation and gave a serious suggestion.
My university schoolmate once told me that the composing of poems requires a certain degree of talent. It's best you start by reading the classical poems Anthology of the Lowen Kingdom.
Leonard's mood changed on a whim. He replied with a light-hearted tone.
I purchased that book a long time ago, as well as other titles, such as the Selected Poems of Roselle. I will work hard to become a true midnight poet, Mr. Seer.
Is he hinting at the acting method?
Klein replied, as though he couldn't understand him.
You would still need books on grammar.
All right, let's enter.
Leonard extended his hand and pushed open the half-closed metallic gates. The two of them then followed the path towards the house. They were still a distance away from the house when Klein saw a tall man walking out from behind the main door. He had short blonde hair, his brows already laced with white hairs. His facial features looked like they had been ravaged through age. His wrinkles were etched deep across his face. "How, tall man, walking out first house?" the aged man asked in a deep voice.
What are you doing here?
Leonard explained with a smile.
Mr. Gawain, as per your contract with the police department, this probationary inspector will be learning the art of combat under your guidance.
Combat? There's no need to study combat in this era.
Gawain looked at Klein with turbid eyes and said in a dead voice,
You should learn how to draw your gun and shoot. You should master the most advanced weaponry.
Was this the psychological trauma caused by the six-barrel machine guns and high-pressure steam guns?
Klein didn't give a reckless reply. Instead, he smiled and looked at Leonard. Leonard said, obviously prepared for the situation.
The art of combat is still a skill a policeman has to master. Most of the criminals we face are not those who must be executed on the spot. Some might not even have weapons. In that case, we have to rely on combat techniques.
With a dark expression, Gawain fell silent for more than 10 seconds before saying,
Throw a punch.
He was speaking to Klein. Klein, who was not holding his cane, remembered the boxing matches he had seen in his previous life. He raised his arm and threw it forward. Gawain's lips twitched indiscernibly. He thought for a moment and said,
Kick.
Tilting to the side slightly and twisting his hips, Klein tightened his thigh muscles and kicked forward with his right foot. Cough. Gawain covered his mouth and cleared his throat. He looked at Leonard and said,
I will honor my contract, but based on his foundation, he needs to come here 4 times a week, 3 hours each time for the first month.
You're the combat expert. It's up to you.
Leonard nodded without hesitation. He smiled and said to Klein,
See you at dinner.
After Leonard walked out the metallic gates, Klein asked out of curiosity,
Instructor, how should I begin practicing? Punching or footwork?
As a qualified keyboard warrior, he understood the importance of footwork in combat. Gawain stood akimbo as he shook his head lethargically.
What you need now is strength training. See those? Those are 2 dumbbells made of steel. They shall be your partners for today. Other than that, you also have to practice deep squats, running, and rope skipping. Let us take those 1 set at a time.
While Klein was still in a daze, Gawain suddenly raised his voice and said sternly,
Understood?
Understood.
At this moment, Klein felt as though he had returned to military training and was facing an inhumane instructor.
Change out of your clothes. There's a set of knight's training clothes on the sofa.
Gawain suddenly sighed. He turned around and walked toward the black steel dumbbells. 6 in the evening, at a corner table of the Old Will restaurant. Other than Fry, who was guarding Chanis Gate, all the members of the Blackthorn Security Company were present. There were 6 Nighthawks and 5 civilian staff. A white tablecloth was draped over the long table. Waiters carried over plates of food, portioned them before serving them to each individual guest. Klein saw steaks drenched in black pepper sauce. He saw bacon, sausages paired with mashed potatoes, egg puddings, asparagus, and specialty cheeses. He even saw rose-colored champagne. However, he had no appetite. The training in the afternoon had nearly made him vomit. Noticing the pale, newly inducted Nighthawk with turbid eyes, Dunn raised the glass of red wine in front of him and laughed.
Let us welcome our newest official member, Klein Moretti. Cheers.
The cold and introverted black-haired lady, Royal Radine, the sleepless Kenley White, the sloppy Leonard Mitchell, as well as the white-haired, black-eyed midnight poet Seekatron, all raised their cups and looked at the new member of their team. Klein fought back the discomfort of the training and raised his glass of amber champagne. He stood and said,
Thank you.
He clinked glasses with every Nighthawk, tilted his head back, and finished the small amount of champagne. Dunn smiled as he looked at Seekatron.
Is our Miss Author not going to say something on this occasion?
Seekatron was a lady in her 30s. She had average looks, but had an exceptional demeanor, one that was quiet and serene. Coupled with her few strands of graying hair, it added a unique charm to her. Klein had heard old Neil mention that this midnight poet had taken on a side job as an author and had attempted to submit her works to newspapers and magazines. Unfortunately, only a few smaller newspapers had accepted them. Sika smiled and looked at Dunn.
In order to make the term Miss Author into a reality, Captain, I think you should give me some funds to self-publish my work.
Dunn laughed.
You should learn from old Neil and give me a more suitable reason.
Roseanne echoed in between her mouthfuls of roast mutton.
I'm most impressed with Mr. Neil in this department.
Amidst the chatter and laughter, Leonard looked at Klein and said with a chuckle,
Are you so tired that you have no appetite to eat?
Yeah.
Klein sighed.
If you haven't touched your food yet, I can be of assistance.
Leonard acted as though he didn't want to waste any food. Klein didn't mind. He nodded and said,
That wouldn't be an issue.
And with that, a good portion of the food in front of him was eaten by Leonard and the rest. Nearing the end of the dinner, the waiters served plates of beef pudding and ice cream. Klein tasted ice cream and found it cold and sweet. It was particularly appetizing. Before he realized it, he had finished the ice cream drizzled with a blueberry sauce. And as a result of this, he started to feel the hunger pangs. It was a hunger which demanded recharging food that came after intense exertion. Swallowing his saliva, Klein looked to the front, only to see that all the plates were empty. There were no leftovers. Dunn suggested,
Let's end the dinner here and give Klein a final toast.
Before finishing his sentence, Klein asked,
Captain, may I order another plate of food?
The group fell silent after hearing such a request, only to break out into chuckles moments later. Dunn shook his head and laughed.
Haha, you finally recovered. No problem, order 2 plates if you want to.
While patiently waiting an unbearable amount of time, Klein heard his stomach growling. Finally, a freshly prepared black pepper steak was served before him. His fork and knife danced as Klein finished the medium-done steak in 90 seconds, tears nearly falling from his eyes. The meat juices and the fragrance of the sauce lingered in his mouth. Sometime later, Klein let out a satisfied sigh as he looked at his empty plate. He put down his knife and fork and took a sip of his champagne. Dunn turned around and called for the waiter.
Waiter, the bill, please.
The waiter went to the counter, then returned with the check. He gave a thorough breakdown.
You opened 5 bottles of Desi champagne, each bottle being 12 soldi and 3 pence. A small glass of Southville red wine for 10 pence. Each black pepper beefsteak was 1 soldi 2 pence. Each serving of beef pudding was 6 pence. The servings of ice cream was 1 soldi each. The total would be £5, 9 soldi and 6 pence.
£5, 9 soldi and 6 pence? That's nearly my weekly salary. A restaurant is indeed much more expensive than eating at home.
Klein clicked his tongue upon hearing that. He felt lucky that the captain had said that he didn't need to pay out of his own pocket. They had some petty cash from bonus earnings. He calculated the cost carefully and noticed that the most expensive portion of the meal was the alcohol. 5 bottles of champagne had cost more than £3.
This is no different from Earth.
Klein secretly rubbed his stomach and forced down the last of his champagne. The next morning, Klein felt bloated. He tried to get off the bed in his sleepy stupor. Just as he exerted strength, he was instantly awakened by his aching muscles. He felt as though his body wasn't under his control.
What a familiar feeling. It's the same as that day after we got punished with frog jumps. Today is a rest day, but I still have to pay a visit to my mentor and see if I can borrow the monograph on the Hornassus main peak from the library at the university.
Klein's lips twitched as he made his way outside with some effort. He wanted to draw a gasp with every step. Melissa, who had just come out of the bathroom, sized up her brother suspiciously for his odd posture and slow movement.
Klein, what happened to you?
Chapter 98. Mr. AZIK. Faced with his sister's question, all Klein could do was reply with a regretful smile.
Sore muscles.
He originally believed that by consuming the sequence potion, his constitution would be enhanced as a Beyonder, but the harsh reality told him that a seer's stats points were all allocated to his spirituality, mind, intuition, and interpretation. It didn't aid him in adjusting to combat training quickly. As for the original Klein, he had focused on his studies early on and had suffered from malnutrition. That led him to possess a below-average physical condition. The fact that he was having after effects from working out was to be expected.
Sore muscles? I remember you returning after dinner last night and you didn't do anything else. Does alcohol cause sore muscles?
Melissa inquired with an inquisitive look.
Does alcohol cause sore muscles? Sis, that question can't help but make me have inappropriate thoughts.
Klein laughed dryly and said,
No, this has nothing to do with alcohol. It was from yesterday afternoon. I joined the company's combat training.
Combat?
Melissa was even more astonished. Klein organized his thoughts and said,
Well, this is what happened. I considered it and believed that as a historical and relic consultant of a security company, it's impossible for me to stay in the office or port warehouse forever. Perhaps there will come a day when I have to accompany them to the villages or an ancient castle, to the site of some relic. That might require me to hike, to cross rivers, and to walk a lot. I'll have to endure all sorts of tests posed by nature, so I have to possess a sufficiently healthy body.
So you joined combat training to enhance your stamina?
Melissa seemed to understand her brother's intention.
That's right.
Klein answered with great affirmation. Melissa said with a frown,
But that isn't gentlemanly. Don't you always keep yourself to the standards of a professor? A professor only requires the ability to read historical documents, ponder over difficult questions, and maintain a polite and gentlemanly demeanor. Of course, I'm not saying that those aren't all good things. I prefer men who can solve problems on their own, regardless of whether that solution requires brawn or brain.
Melissa smiled. Klein smiled and said,
No, Melissa. Your definition of a professor contains a misconception. A true professor can communicate with people gently and politely, but he can also educate the other person using the principles of physics by raising a cane to convince someone when there's an obstacle in communication.
Principles of Physics.
Melissa was momentarily at a loss, but she quickly understood what her brother was saying. She was suddenly unable to retort him. Klein didn't say anything more, but widened his pace with great difficulty as he headed for the bathroom. Melissa stood there and looked for a few seconds. She suddenly shook her head and caught up to Klein.
Do you need my help?
She posed as if she was supporting someone.
No, there's no need to. I was hamming it up a bit earlier.
Klein felt humiliated. He suddenly stood straight and walked normally. Watching her brother walk steadily to the washroom and close the door, Melissa pursed her lips and muttered,
Klein is getting more and more pretentious. I even believed that his muscle soreness was really that serious.
In the bathroom, Klein stood behind the tightly shut door, his face suddenly contorting in pain.
Ouch, ouch, ouch.
He held his breath, tensed his body, and stood there for a good 7 or 8 seconds. When he finally went downstairs with great effort, had breakfast, and saw Benson and Melissa off, his soreness finally began to ease. After resting for a little while, Klein took his cane, donned his top hat, and left the house, strolling towards the public carriage stop. During the summer, Coy University had trees with shade-providing foliage, flourishing with birds and luxuriant flowers. It was peaceful and calm. Walking along the river, Klein took a turn towards the history department. Then he found the 3-story building which showed its age and located his mentor's, Cohen Quentin's office. He knocked and entered the room, but he was shocked to see that the man sitting at his mentor's seat was the academic, AZIK. Klein asked, puzzled.
Good morning, Mr. AZIK. Where's my mentor? We made an appointment by letter to meet here at 10.
AZIK, who was Cohen Quentin's best friend and often debated with his mentor regarding academic topics, smiled and said,
Cohen had a last-minute meeting and went to Tingen University. He asked me to wait for you here.
He had bronze skin, an average height and build, black hair, brown eyes, and gentle facial features. Being in his presence brought on an indescribable feeling, as though you could see in the man's eyes that he had been through the vicissitudes of life. Under his right ear was a tiny mole that one wouldn't notice unless closely examined. Having said the reason, AZIK suddenly frowned as he carefully observed Klein. Feeling confused by the sudden scrutiny, Klein looked at his attire.
Have I committed some breach of etiquette? Act 2. Tuxedo. Black vest, white shirt, black bow tie, dark-colored trousers, leather boots with no buttons. Everything seems normal.
AZIK's brows eased, and he chuckled softly.
Don't mind me. I suddenly noticed that you are way more energetic than before. You look even more like a gentleman now.
Thank you for your compliment.
Klein accepted it calmly and asked,
Mr. AZIK, did my mentor manage to find the book Research of the Hornacys Main Peaks Relics in the school library?
AZIK said, smiling gently.
He found it with my assistance.
He then pulled open the drawer and took out a gray-covered book.
You are no longer a Coy University student anymore. You can read it here, but you cannot take it home.
All right.
Klein delightfully took the academic monograph and with a hint of fear. The book's design was fully in line with the current trends. It used hard paper as a hardcover, and it was printed with an image like an abstract version of the main peak of Hornacys mountain range. Klein took a glance and found a seat. He flipped open the book and started reading carefully, line by line. As he became engrossed in the book, he suddenly realized that there was a cup of rich and fragrant coffee by his side. AZIK put down the silver saucer and pointed at the milk jar and sugar container.
Help yourself to the sugar and milk.
Thank you.
Klein nodded with gratitude. He added 3 cubes of sugar and a teaspoon of milk before continuing to read his book. The book, Research of the Hornacys Main Peaks Relics, was not a very thick book. Klein finished reading it when it was almost noon. He took note of a few noteworthy points. First, the settlement on the main peak of Hornacys Mountain and its surrounding area was obviously an advanced civilization, which existed as part of an ancient nation. Second, from their wall murals, their perspective on life appears similar to that of humans. I can assume for now that they were human. Third, they revered yet feared the darkness of the night, hence they called their god the ruler of the Evernight, mother of the sky. Fourth, the weirdest part is that researchers haven't found any graves in the entire area, which initially seems to indicate that the people didn't need to be buried because they didn't die. However, that would be contradictory to the contents of the wall murals. In the wall murals, the people in the nation believed that death is not the end. They believed that their deceased family would protect them in the night. Hence, they would keep their deceased family members at home on the bed by their side for a full 3 days. There is nothing beyond that for the wall murals, as it doesn't involve burials. Klein took another sip of coffee and continued to write down his afterthoughts in his notebook.
Mother of the Sky, Sky Mother is such a grand title, while the ruler of the Evernight obviously overlaps with the Evernight goddess. Is this a contradiction at its roots?
In the ancient remains on the main peak of the Hornissus mountain range and its surrounding area, every arrangement and decoration was well preserved. Even the wall murals didn't have any signs of damage. Before it was discovered, there seemed to be no disturbance at all. The table was arranged with cutlery, and there were dried stains of rot on the dining plates. In some rooms, there were half-filled bottles of alcohol that had almost turned into plain water.
What happened to the nation's people? They seem to have left their homes in a hurry, without taking anything with them, and they never returned. Considering how there are no burial grounds, this only makes it weirder.
The author, Mr. Joseph, also mentioned that when he first discovered the remains, he even had the belief that the people residing there had just vanished all of a sudden. Klein stopped writing and cast his gaze at an illustration. On John Joseph's third visit to the main peak of the Hornissus mountain range, he had used a new camera model to shoot a monochrome photograph. In the photo, the lofty palace had a collapsed wall and was overgrown with weeds. It followed a grandeur style for its design. When he flipped to the photograph, Klein's first thought was that of the palace he had seen in his dream.
The two styles were identical. The only difference was that the one he had dreamed of was on a peak and it was way more magnificent. It also had a huge chair, a seat of honor, that looked like it didn't seat a human. Countless translucent maggots clustered together and squirmed slowly beneath the chair. I can confirm that my dream is related to the ancient remains on the main peak of the Hornissus mountain range. That should be the nation of the Evernight, which was referenced in the Antigonus family's notebook.
Klein nodded slightly and closed the book. At that moment, AZIK, who was sitting opposite him, touched the inconspicuous mole under his right ear and said,
How was it? Found anything?
Quite a bit. Take a look, I've written so many pages of notes.
Klein pointed at the table and smiled. AZIK sighed and said,
I don't understand why you're suddenly so interested in this matter. Klein, when I was studying at the Backlund University, I had dabbled with some divination and did quite a bit of research on that. Well, I discovered that there is disharmony in your fate.
As a seer, Klein looked at AZIK the academic in amusement.
What? Divination? Are you talking to me about divination? How is it disharmonious?
AZIK thought for a moment.
Have you encountered many strange coincidences in the past 2 months?
Coincidences?
As he was indebted to Mr. AZIK, Klein didn't dispute his question, as he subconsciously began thinking.
If we are talking about coincidences, the most obvious matter was when we were after kidnappers. We actually managed to find clues of the Antigonus family's notebook that was lost for days in the room opposite the kidnappers. Also, Ray Bieber didn't flee from Tingen in a hurry. Instead, he found a place to digest the power bestowed by the notebook, allowing for sealed artifact 2049 to track him down easily. That seemed to be against common sense. Although Ayor Harson gave a reasonable explanation, I always had a nagging feeling that it was somewhat coincidental. Oh, Selena had stolen a glance at Hanas Vincent's secret incantations, but she held back till her birthday dinner banquet to try it out, and I happened to discover it, which is quite a coincidence too. Otherwise, Hanas Vincent wouldn't have been the only one to die so suddenly.
Klein thought about it seriously for a few minutes and said,
There are 3, neither too many nor too frequent. Furthermore, There was nothing that indicated someone's involvement in guidance.
AZIK nodded slightly.
As Emperor Roselle once said, a single coincidence is encountered by anyone. Twice is still normal. Thrice is when one should consider what internal factors are influencing those coincidences.
Klein probed.
Can you tell me anything else?
AZIK laughed and shook his head.
I can only tell that there's some disharmony, but nothing else. You have to understand that I'm not a real seer.
Isn't that basically equal to saying nothing? Mr. AZIK is quite odd. He's playing a charlatan in front of a charlatan like me.
Klein let out a breath. Seizing the moment when AZIK stood up, he pinched his glabella and activated his spirit vision. When he looked over, AZIK's aura fully appeared before his eyes, and everything seemed fairly normal. He thought carefreely as he tapped his glabella again while standing up.
Unfortunately, I can only see the ether body and astral projection of a person above the gray fog.
Chapter 99. Red Chimney. Late in the afternoon, Klein returned home and drew the curtains, allowing his room to slip into darkness. He took out his pen and paper and thought for a long time, finally writing down a sentence. The kidnapping of Elliot was due to beyonder elements. As a seer, Klein had tried to divine if those coincidences were a consequence of unnatural developments, but the results showed otherwise. This time, he was influenced by AZIK to look into these events again. He also drew lessons from the suited clown. He seriously designed an appropriate divination statement, eliminating any descriptions that might be vague or cause confusion. Klein nodded in thought as he slowly removed the topaz from his wrist.
Yes, I should break down the 3 coincidences and divine them separately.
He held the spirit pendulum with his left hand and allowed it to hang close over the divination statement on the paper. He collected himself and entered a state of cogitation. With his eyes closed, Klein started chanting repeatedly.
The kidnapping of Elliot was due to beyonder elements.
As he recited the statement over and over again, Klein opened his eyes and looked at the pendulum, only to see the topaz turning counterclockwise slowly. Klein muttered to himself.
It's still a negative.
He designed several other divination statements, but the results persisted. There was nothing strange about that incident. He then separately divined the event of Ray Bieber's stay in Tingen and Selena's magic mirror divination incident, but the answers for both events were normal. Klein laughed and shook his head.
Was I, a real seer, frightened by the charlatan Mr. AZIK? Besides, Captain and the others didn't feel that anything was off.
But he remained cautious. He planned on using the dream divination technique to get a final confirmation. After some thought, he changed the divination statement to fit the change in method. As he scribbled with the fountain pen, Klein paused and pondered over his words. The true reason for Elliot's kidnapping. After reading it over and over again, he tore the slip of paper and walked toward his bed. He relaxed and laid down. With the divination statement in hand, Klein quickly fell asleep with the help of cogitation. He found himself in a contorted, broken world. Regaining his senses, he began swimming through the blur. Gradually, he saw the few kidnappers. He saw them lose their final chip at a gambling table, saw them obtain guns from underground sources, and saw them survey the area. They even rented the apartment across Ray Bieber's apartment as their hideout. These didn't form a continuous scene. Instead, they were presented in the form of flashing pictures. Klein couldn't find anything that was abnormal. Furthermore, it had also aligned with the statements given by the kidnappers. After exiting the dream, Klein separately divined the other 2 incidents but had the same result. Their developments followed logic. The coincidences were really coincidences. Klein stabilized his pendulum and shook his head with a bitter smile.
I was indeed overthinking things. Mr. AZIK is merely a divination enthusiast.
He was about to draw the curtains and allow sunlight into the room when he froze. Klein frowned and couldn't ease his worries. He needed a way to confirm this.
From the original Klein's impression of Mr. AZIK, he is a dependable and trustworthy person. He had never once said anything baseless. Even if he was always quarreling with Mentor, it was limited to academic topics, and each of them had their reasons. If he was truly a mere divination enthusiast, he wouldn't have interacted with me like that, and the memories of original Klein has nothing about him liking divination. Of course, this could be due to the loss of corresponding memories.
He suspected that Mr. AZIK had unwittingly come across some insider information and was trying to remind him by using divination as an excuse. Klein paced back and forth across the dark room, trying to recall the other divination techniques he knew.
How should I confirm this?
1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. He suddenly halted as an idea came to him. Klein felt pumped. He pulled open his drawer and took out a silver dagger.
Let's assume that these coincidences are dubious. I'm unable to divine a result, either because my sequence isn't high enough or I'm being affected by outside interference, but I can change my environment. I can change my environment to some place that is even more mysterious and even harder to understand.
He concentrated and allowed his spirituality to flow out from the tip of the dagger, becoming one with his surroundings. With each step he took, the wall of spirituality sealed off the entire room. Klein planned on doing the divination above the gray fog to do the divination in that mysterious world. In the magnificent ancient divine hall above the endless gray fog, Klein sat at the seat of honor on one end of the bronze table. Before him was a piece of goatskin he willed into existence. He lifted a pen and tried writing the divination statement as he had previously. He wrote, "The kidnapping of Elliot was due to beyonder elements." He held the spirit pendulum and hung it low. Klein quickly composed himself as he turned silent and ethereal. Half closing his eyes, he recited the statement 7 times, using his spirituality to interact with the spiritual world that stood above all. Feeling the tug of the silver chain, Klein opened his eyes to look at the pendulum. The sight made him freeze immediately. The pendulum was spinning clockwise. This meant that there was a beyonder element behind Elliot's kidnapping. This was completely different from the result he had gotten in the outside world. Klein was immensely shocked. He lost his calm, and the rotation of the pendulum slipped into chaos.
There were no traces of any interference. Such power or means is terrifying. What's the motive of the person behind this? Is my fate intertwined with the Antigonus family's diary?
He put down the topaz and rubbed his glabella. His expression was abnormally grave. After contemplating for a few seconds, he didn't attempt to divine the other 2 events. Instead, he wrote a new divination statement, the true reason for Elliot's kidnapping. He held the paper in his hand and recited the statement 7 times. Klein leaned back and fell into sleep above the fog. Soon he saw a boundless, illusory grayish-white fog. The fog dissipated slowly, revealing a colorful lawn filled with flowers. The space behind the flowers and the plains was folding into itself, like a monster that had come alive. Klein tried his best to look forward, barely making out an image of a dark red chimney. At this point, the scene before him shattered, putting an end to his dream. Klein abruptly straightened his back in the majestic divine hall. His heart was beating wildly without reason. Vanchiving, he took in 2 deep breaths to stabilize his chaotic emotions.
Whew. It felt like I had just spied on a terrifying thing.
Tap, tap, tap. Klein tapped on the side of the table sometime later and slipped into deep thought.
Red chimney. Garden, lawn. How is this related to the person behind all of this? I cannot determine his motive from the coincidences, nor can I conclude that there is any evil intent. We are like puppets dancing on a string. What's even scarier is that we thought so highly of ourselves.
In the midst of this thinking, Klein felt alarmed, for himself, Captain, Fry, and the others. Klein rubbed his temples as if he had a headache.
Sigh. I don't know how to raise this matter to Captain. Old Neil's divination produced the same results as mine in the outside world. If they ask me to confirm it in front of them, I have no way of doing that.
After nearly 20 seconds of calm, he began divining the event of Ray Bieber's stay in Tingen. Similarly, he first used spirit dowsing. This time, Klein was shocked to see his topaz hang motionless. It was neither a confirmation or rejection of the statement. "Ha ha," he muttered.
Strange.
He started to guess the reasons for this phenomenon.
The person behind this has sensed my divinations and engaged in countermeasures.
Following this, he tried the dream divination technique, but all he saw were fragmented pieces of fog. He no longer made any new discoveries. The results of Selena's magic mirror divination incident were the same. Klein could almost confirm his conjecture at this point. Since he had no way of notifying Captain Dunsmith for the time being, he had an unprecedented motivation to improve his abilities. Klein held his forehead with his right palm and quickly drew up a plan and determined his focal point.
I must head to the divination club later and quickly succeed in my acting to digest the seer potion. Also, I have to confirm whether the clown potion is indeed the subsequent sequence of seer, as well as gather clues about it. In addition, I have to interact more with Mr. AZIK and see if I can dig up whatever inside information he holds.
After some thought, a goat skin appeared in front of him again. He picked up his pen and wrote, "The corresponding sequence 8 of sequence 9 seer is clown." From his prior experience, the present Klein was completely convinced that his divination abilities were augmented and enhanced above the gray fog. He muttered and picked up his spirit pendulum.
Just like how raids are usually successful, is this the result of having good luck?
Sometime later, Klein received a definitive answer. The corresponding sequence 8 of sequence 9 seer was clown. He then wrote on the paper once again. He wrote, "The corresponding sequences 8, 7, 6, and 5 of seer would grant at least one brand new, unrelated power." Klein exhaled as he tried spirit dowsing again. However, he saw the topaz hang motionlessly without any rotations. Hard as one brick. He muttered to himself while seemingly deep in thought.
There isn't enough information to complete the divination and receive a revelation?
Then, he set down the silver chain and began considering the required statement for a dream divination. Nearly 20 seconds later, he picked up his fountain pen and wrote seriously, "Clues to the Clown Potion. Chapter 100, Interpreting Symbols."
Clues to the clown potion.
On the seat of honor at the ancient bronze table, Klein repeated the divination statement a few times before leaning back and entering a deep sleep. His surroundings quickly became peaceful and quiet. He saw a hazy view with countless distorted and blurry scenes flashing past, just like drops of morning dew on tender flower petals. Gradually, Klein grasped his spirituality and came to his senses. He saw a fireplace before him with a rocking chair in front of it. Sitting on it was an old woman dressed in black and white. Although he couldn't see her face since she was hanging her head low, Klein's gut feeling told him that she was an old lady. And he was pretty certain about it. The old lady was facing a desk directly. There were newspapers and tin cans inlaid with silver on the desk. Klein found the scene before his eyes very familiar, and he quickly recognized what he saw.
This
was where Ray Bieber and his mother stayed. This was where he saw a bloated cadaver for the first time.
There are clues that point to the clown potion here?
Just as Klein's thoughts flashed past, the scene around him transformed. It was a grayish-white warehouse, hidden among identical buildings. There were white bones scattered all around, and a few balls of flesh that looked like they had been squashed by a boulder. In the middle of the warehouse was a grayish-white object that was the size of a fist. Its surface was filled with ditches, and it looked soft but ductile. It looked like a brain that had been extracted out of a living being. Just as Klein recognized the scene and recalled something, the scene before him distorted like rippling water before transforming into another new blurry scene. A naked body was laid on a long table covered with a white cloth. There were some bluish, discolored patches on the corpse's skin. Klein suddenly knitted his eyebrows and muttered,
It was first the images of Ray Bieber's hiding place and his remains, and now it's related to the brand on the suited clown's wrist?
Just as he attempted to speculate what the scenes meant, the scene suddenly changed again. A marble coffee table, a set of 2 leather couches, and a chandelier that hung high on the ceiling. There were 3 people: Klein Moretti, who had black hair, brown eyes, and a scholarly temperament; a wealthy man with a chubby body and pale skin; and a beautiful young lady with fishnet gloves. Following that, it was another 3 people and an object. A middle-aged man in a black robe who had thick spiky brown hair, a wealthy man with a chubby body and pale skin, a half-century-old elder with messy eyebrows, thin brown hair and gray-blue eyes, and a black notebook on the round table in between all of them, a notebook that exuded an ancient and distant air. The Antigonus family's notebook! Klein suddenly sat up straight, and the dream vanished. Looking outside the divine hall, where there was boundless gray fog and crimson stars, he thought in both shock and confusion.
I was divining for clues to the clown potion. Why would the Antigonus family's notebook show up? Kappa. Let me think. That chubby guy was Welch. Yes, Welch, an unfortunate fellow who bought the Antigonus family's notebook and triggered a sequence of incidents. The beautiful young lady wearing fishnet gloves was Naya. I remember. The marble coffee table and leather couch combination is a hallmark of Welch's place. I saw spirit medium daily there. In other words, what I saw was Welch's living room. It was the scene where the original Klein and his 2 classmates were discussing the notebook.
Klein calmed himself down and tapped on the edge of the long bronze table rhythmically.
Then, what does the last scene represent? The notebook appeared, Welch appeared. Could it be the scene where he bought the ancient item? Nagris's cake-hold rebarge? There were another 2 people, and one of them looked very familiar. I feel like I've seen the middle-aged man in the classic black robe somewhere before. That spiky brown hair, severe dark eye circles. Yes, I know who is he now. Hanas Vincent from the Divination Club. The Hanas Vincent who died peacefully after Captain snuck into his dream, having learned that Selena secretly obtained the secret incantation from him. No way. He was the one that sold the notebook to Welch? Everything appears to be coming full circle. The world sure is small. No, Tingen is really small. On careful thought, it really is a possibility that Hanas Vincent wasn't an ordinary fortune teller. He was obviously deep into mysticism and obtained the attention of an ancient evil god. He had the channels, ability, and opportunity to acquire the notebook that was accidentally released by the secret order. It's no wonder Captain and company never figured out where Welch bought the notebook. Their investigative approach was entirely wrong. They had attempted to investigate via the antique market, but when the actual whereabouts of the notebook was found, they gave up on that lead. What a pity Hanas Vincent just passed away not too long ago. Otherwise, we definitely could have found out something regarding the notebook. Since he was involved in mysticism, he should have researched the notebook. His death was way too coincidental. However, there was another person at the scene, a man in his 50s. He might know quite a bit of what happened.
Klein stopped tapping his fingers on the edge of the table and looked through every scene of his dream divination once more.
Ray Bieber's house. Ray Bieber's hideout spot, the remains of Ray Bieber, the brand on the suited clown's wrist, Welch's house, Welch, Naya, and original Klein's exchange, Welch, Hanas Vincent, and the Antigonus family notebooks group photo. Besides the brand on the suited clown, everything else is directly related to the Antigonus family's notebook, but I had divined for clues to the clown potion. This isn't scientific, nor does it make mystical sense.
After becoming a seer, Klein once tried to divine where Welch had bought the Antigonus family's notebook, but he never considered using the unique qualities that the area above the gray fog possessed. As such, he had failed to receive any revelations, but now he had chanced upon the truth by divining something separate. After spending nearly 20 seconds to calm down, Klein summarized the context provided by Roselle's diary and attempted to interpret his dream divination.
The first possibility, Zaratul, or should I say, the secret order, was searching and pursuing the relics of the Antigonus family. So the symbolic meaning of the dream is to use matters related to the Antigonus family to lure the secret order into appearing, so as to obtain the clown potion's formula. The second possibility, the clown potion's formula is directly recorded in the Antigonus family's notebook. The fact that the Zaratul family is seeking the relics of the Antigonus family implies that they share very deep connections that could have been allies or enemies. Hence, it seems fairly natural that the Antigonus family possess parts of their sequence. Things would be obvious if they were allies, but enemies are the ones who would know each other the best. But the second explanation wouldn't be able to link it to the brand on the suited clown. Sigh. I do wish that the second explanation were true, though. When the Holy Cathedral finds an expert to interpret the notebook, I would be able to obtain the clown potion without any risk. It seems that the first explanation is the most plausible. My gut feeling as a seer tells me that there might be a deeper symbolic meaning.
Having thought of this, Klein massaged his forehead and suddenly realized the limitations of a seer.
Unless it was a very simple and straightforward sign, a seer had to be extremely careful when making interpretations. It was just like walking on the edge of the abyss or walking on a thin layer of ice over a lake's surface. The suited clown's outcome was an actual and bloody example of what a single mistaken interpretation or failure to grasp a key point could result in.
In that instant, Klein had an illusion of himself mastering the true essence of a seer. He seemed to be just one step away from digesting the potion completely. He muttered and drew a crimson moon before his chest.
Thank you for enlightening me with your life. Praise the lady.
Then he divined whether AZIK had good intentions or if he was an amazing beyonder. He received confirmations for both of them. Ela good borka, borka, borka. Eventually, the continuous divinations exhausted Klein. He had no choice but to stop churning through his thoughts and decide on the crucial matters that he needed to attend to.
I have to find the man that appeared in the same scene with Welch, Hanas Vincent, and the Antigonus family's notebook as soon as possible. I can begin my search with the Divination Club. I can't just confront Mr. AZIK. Yes, he might be a mid-sequence beyonder of the life school of thought, but there's a lack of information, making it impossible for me to divine.
Phew. Klein let out a breath and conjured the portrait of the half-century-old elder with messy eyebrows, thin brown hair, and gray-blue eyes on the goat skin that appeared before him. This was the third person present when the Antigonus family's notebook was traded between Welch and Hanas Vincent. Looking at the portrait, Klein suddenly fell into a dilemma.
I can't draw. During art class in primary school, I was always the one receiving the greatest criticism from the teachers. Should I use ritualistic magic like Old Neil? This was done by praying to the goddess. If I were to use the uniqueness of the area above the gray fog, I would be in trouble if the divinities noticed something amiss. Hold on a second. Perhaps I can pray to myself. Transmitting images and transmitting voices are similar. Although I'm temporarily unable to access the mysterious power above the gray fog, accomplishing such a minor matter shouldn't be a problem.
Having thought of this, Klein immediately emanated his spirituality to envelop himself to simulate the feeling of falling. Moon. Back in his bedroom, he lit the gas lamp and prayed.
The fool that doesn't belong to this era. You are the mysterious ruler above the gray fog. You are the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. I pray for your revelation and pray that you allow me to draw what I've seen.
After reciting the incantation, Klein didn't splash essential oils or burn any herbs to gain the help of their powers.
It was just that informal when praying to oneself.
There were suddenly murmurs in his ears as he saw the 4 black dots that formed a square surface on the back of his hand. He walked 4 steps counterclockwise and recited the incantation before penetrating the maniacal chaos to return to the area above the gray fog. This time he didn't see any of the crimson stars shrinking or expanding, but behind the seat of honor at the long bronze table, the strange symbol formed by a partial pupilless eye and partial contorted lines shimmered weakly as it produced illusory prayers. Klein held his ear to it and listened. After making sure that there were no mistakes, he conjured the portrait of the third person and cast it towards the flowing light in accordance to the prayer's format. After everything was done, he immediately left the mysterious world above the gray fog and returned to his bedroom. Just as he found his footing, a portrait surfaced immediately in front of Klein's eyes. Furthermore, he sensed a weak and illusory power augmenting him. He picked up a fountain pen and found a piece of white paper and expressed his intent. Klein was surprised to find his right hand moving uncontrollably as it quickly drew lines. Before long, he saw a lifelike portrait of the third person. After writing down the hair and eye colors, as well as other unique characteristics, Klein heaved a sigh of relief despite the spasms of his right hand. The illusion before his eyes rapidly dissipated.